Today we are going to be doing my October reading wrap up. So I have quite a few books to go over. I read 10 total. I did a couple audiobooks sprinkled in there, and I read a lot of spooky thriller horror books, more than I usually do. So I have a stack of those books to go over, and then I have a few random books that I just kind of read this month, and then a couple that I included in my 10 before the end, which is 10 books to finish before the end of the year. And if you want to see my 10 before the end video, it is on TikTok. It's under the same screen name, Book Creases, so check me out there too, because I put different stuff up there. Let's start with a book that I have had on my shelves for probably about 2 years now, and I was kind of saving this one because initially I did a unhaul video a couple months ago, and this was kind of on the chopping block, and I was like, I really feel bad getting rid of it if I haven't read it yet, and it is such a quick thriller type read that I should be able to read it really quickly, and that is Not a Happy Family. I got this as like one of those buy two get one free Target deals a long time ago because I was still kind of reading more thrillers at that time, and I hadn't read this author before, and she's a pretty popular thriller author, so I picked this one up. Yeah, didn't love it. Didn't like it that much. This book is about a rich family, 3 adult children, and their parents are murdered brutally in their family home, and the 3 children are the main suspects to the crime since they are to inherit a lot of money. I guess the whodunit person before the ending, so there wasn't really any surprises for me in this book. It was very sparse, stark writing, very straight to the point, like, she went down the hall, she said this, then she saw this, then she got in her car, and I guess I forget that that's kind of how a lot of these types of thrillers are written, and kind of maybe why I've not read them as much lately, just because they don't do it for me as much anymore. And if I'm gonna read a thriller, I want some like surprise twist or something at the end that really makes all of this buildup worth it. And for me, it was not worth it. The ending was very predictable, and so it was kind of pointless. I don't really recommend this one. I mean, to me, even being a person who doesn't read a lot of thrillers, this was very, very average, if not below average. So I ended up giving this 2 stars, but you know what? Now I can unhaul her. Another thriller book that I kind of read this month that has been very popular, and I guess this kind of goes across genres, and that is All the Colors in the Dark. And this is, I would describe as like a literary fiction with thriller and mystery elements, maybe a little bit of horror. It's basically about a small town, and this group of characters gets wrapped up in this case of this serial killer who kidnaps these young girls. You're just following 2 young people, school-age kids, who get wrapped up in this, and kind of how their story progresses along with this case through multiple decades. I found it very fun to read. I liked it a lot. I think because it had that literary fiction elements and really dove into these characters and their relationships and their development, that really gripped me about this one. I can see why some people don't love it though, because it is quite long. I will say it's almost 600 pages, I think. But the way that this is written is it's all the chapters are like a page and a half to 2.5 pages long. So you're ripping through the chapters, and it kind of helps the pacing. The one thing I didn't love is there was a lot of telling and not showing in this book. There was multiple times where the chapter would end on a cliffhanger of something happening, and then the next chapter would be a different perspective, and you would kind of leave that moment, and then you would come back to that moment later on, but then they would just tell you what happened and you wouldn't actually see what happened, and I didn't like that. I can understand happening for some things, but not for every kind of cliffhanger reveal. It was a little bit hard to follow when all the pieces were kind of coming together at the end. I will admit, I did have to Google who some of these characters were at the end, because I was trying to like grapple with like how they were connected. But overall, this did give me kind of like a 5-star feeling. Really, really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed my time with it. Next spooky book I read, I had been saving this for the fall time, and it is a new release this year, and it's Stephen King's You Like It Darker. And this is a collection of short stories. A lot of these stories in here have characters from his other books, but I don't think you have to really read those books to read these stories. I did it, and I still enjoyed the stories quite a bit. This reminded me of why I like Stephen King so much. He's such a good writer of characters, of people, and really makes you really understand them and really like them. Even if some of these stories in here weren't my favorite, I enjoyed the character building aspect, and it really reminded me that I need to get to reading more of Stephen King. I've read, I think, a handful of his books, but I have a couple on my shelf that I have still yet to read. And after reading this, it kind of wanted me to push those up on my physical TBR. So those are probably books that I will prioritize at the end of this year if I finish off all of my TBR goals, or maybe beginning of next year. Really enjoyed this one. I tended to like the longer stories than the shorter ones. I will say some of them weren't like horror, they were just weird. So not every story is like a banger horror story, but I did enjoy it overall, and I ended up giving this 4 stars. Okay, and then the next book I got this at the library as an ebook, and that was The Reformatory. This book has been on my mental TBR for some time, but I had always been kind of intimidated by it because it is kind of a big, thick horror book. I had always kind of been like, oh, one day I'll get to that book. And I was on the Libby app and I saw that it was available. And so I was like, you know what? This is my sign that when else am I going to read it, right? So I borrowed it. I think that because of the horror elements, it gets categorized as horror, but for me, it was just historical fiction. And I think it was maybe an eye-opener to some people who weren't familiar with this time in history, and it sounded really horrific, so they categorized it more towards horror. So the Reformatory is about these real institutions that were in the Deep South, where after slavery was abolished, these schools were put up as kind of like juvenile disciplinary institutions. And of course, only Black youth were sent to them, Black boys. This story follows these 2 young characters, a sister and a brother, who are both in their adolescence, and the brother gets sent to a reformatory school. And it's basically all the horrors that he faced in there, and his sister trying to get him out of there. It is really, really hard to read because a lot of that is true. It's all based on real stories. So I think that that's what makes it so scary. Overall, enjoyed it, but I think that it was too long. I think it could have been edited down, and a lot of the sister's perspective could have been, edited down a little bit. There was a big chunks of what was going on with her that I didn't feel like was super relevant, and I always wanted them to go back to the brother's perspective. It felt like a long book. I also didn't love the ending. I mean, I liked it, but I also felt like there was so many unanswered questions and so many outstanding things with some of the supporting characters that I would have liked to have seen it be wrapped up a little bit nicer, but I understand it was kind of following more of the historical accuracy of that time period, and things weren't wrapped up that nicely. So overall I enjoyed it, but it was kind of a slog for me to get through, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. And then the last kind of like spooky horror book that I read this month was We Used to Live Here, and I actually listened to this on audiobook. I think listening to it on audiobook definitely affected my experience. I didn't love the narrator. They did that weird thing where they like try to do different voices and men's voices, and it was just it's not it. Like, just read it normal. Don't add voices unless it's going to be like a big dramatic reenactment type audiobook where you are going to have multiple people and multiple narrators. Like, don't put on a deep voice for a man. Like, I hate when female narrators do that. I would listen to this a lot also too during my daytime walks with my daughter. So I wasn't really in like an environment to be spooked and be scared. So that probably didn't help either. But overall, it was fine. I think it definitely followed a lot of those tropes of like, why are you doing that against your better judgment? Like, you're doing all the wrong decisions, and that kind of gets frustrating, I think, after a time. And then the ending, a lot of things happen. It's very chaotic, and I felt like there was a lot of plot holes and a lot of things that weren't quite fleshed out and were kind of confusing to follow. So overall, I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was fine. In my last video that I uploaded, I actually talked about book adaptations and books that were being turned into films or television shows, and this book was one of them. This book is actually being produced and starring Blake Lively, so it'll be interesting to see. I think it's being turned into a Netflix film, So I think this book or this story would work better as a film because you could kind of get away with how it ended a little bit better and not have to explain as much if you showed a lot of things. But the way that it was written, I didn't love how things were kind of closed up. So overall, 3 stars. It was fine. It was kind of like the horror book of the season. Everybody was reading it, so I was just curious, and it was available on my Libby app, so I picked it up and listened to it on my walks. Kind of tying into spooky horror, but not really, I read Blood Over Brighthaven, and I borrowed this from the library as well. I'd had a hold on it for quite some time, and it finally came through. And it kind of worked out perfect because it is dark academia, so it followed the good fall vibes that I wanted for October. This book is basically about a woman, and she's admitted into this like magical department within her city that kind of governs that city, and she's the first woman to ever be accepted. And it follows her kind of exploring that department, figuring out, the secrets that it holds, and interacting with these different people that she's never interacted before. The big question that was asked in this book that I really enjoyed was the idea that, is it good enough just to have good intentions, even though those good intentions don't cause any betterment in the world? Or does it not matter your intentions as long as you better the world around you? And so it really made me think, because I was like, you can have all the good intentions in the world, but if they don't have a positive effect, like, does it matter? Does it count? And so that idea really, really kind of made me think, and I really enjoyed reading about it. So I really enjoyed it. I think that it was a little heavy-handed in its messaging. It had, themes of racism, inferiority, misogyny, colonialism. There was a lot of things going on. It was a little heavy-handed for my taste, just because I was like, we understand you don't need to write it out exactly like that, but I get what the author was trying to do. I really liked how the story went. I liked that I couldn't quite guess what was going to happen at any given moment, and that was really fun to read. I also really enjoyed it because it was just a standalone fantasy, and sometimes I just want to read one book of a fantasy. I don't want to commit to like 3, 4, 5 books in a series, and I feel like standalone fantasies are not that common nowadays, or not that popular. So I really enjoyed this one because I could just kind of read it and be done with the story and get the whole story and all the answers at the end and move on. And that's what this did for me. So that's a big theme in here, and you'll kind of see where the character takes that, but I don't want to give away too much. I initially was thinking 5-star, but I ended on a 4-star with this one just because there was something about it that didn't give me that 5-star feeling. Maybe I don't know. But 4 stars, still a very good rating. I still really enjoyed it, and I'm definitely going to read more from this author. And then kind of going on like a more of a tangent of books that I read this month, I read The Sound of Gravel, and I actually read this one in the beginning of the month, and it was kind of random. It hasn't been on my TBR, hasn't even been on my radar. I think I saw it online somewhere, and it sounded like a memoir that I would really like. And if you know me, you know I like a memoir. And it follows this young girl and her kind of growing up in a very extreme polygamous sect in the rural areas of Mexico, kind of outside the Texas border. And her mom is basically the pursuer of this religion and gets married to this man who becomes her stepfather, who has many different wives, many children, and basically she lives in poverty, and she grows up in a house where there's live wires, there's dangerous areas. She's expected to take care of a lot of her siblings, and it's really depressing. It's really sad that somebody would have to deal with all of the things that this character had to deal with. Well, not even character, this person. This was about her real life. I enjoyed it. If you like these types of memoirs where you kind of read about rough coming of age books, then this is probably something you'd be interested in. I enjoyed overall the book, but I did not like the ending. There's this very climactic moment at the end where some crazy shit happens, and she finally gets herself out of there and goes to kind of live a normal life as an adult. It kind of ends with her getting married and looking back at her mother, thinking, my mother had to deal with a lot, and she was dealt a rough hand, and she did the best she could. And if you read this book and you hear the things that her mother does and her mother doesn't do for her children, I just don't think people would be as forgiving. And I kind of wish, this is a memoir, this is this author's feelings, so I can't really grade her bad because she felt a certain way. But I guess me personally reading it, I was like, I don't understand how you could be so forgiving when she's done such atrocious things. So yeah, that kind of left a bad ending for me just because I didn't love that. But I ended up giving it 3 stars. I thought it was pretty decent, pretty good. But yeah, that ending kind of left me on a stale note just because I was like, after you read all the horrible things that happen, she just kind of lets her mom off the hook. So, I don't know. Couldn't be me. Another book that I read on audiobook this month was From Here to the Great Unknown. And this book has become more popular, I think because it's an Oprah book club pick now. But thankfully, I had included this in my video from this last summer about fall anticipated reads. And so it was kind of on my radar. I had put my hold on it at the library a long time ago. So I was able to get the audiobook pretty quickly. And I really enjoyed it. It's basically, if you haven't heard about it, it is a biography of Lisa Marie Presley, who was Elvis Presley's only daughter. So Lisa Marie was writing this book and was creating these tapes of her talking about her life growing up as Elvis's daughter, and she suddenly passed in 2020. And before she had passed, she asked her daughter Riley, who was Elvis's granddaughter, Riley Coe, if she would help her finish the book. Well, Lisa Marie passed suddenly, and so Riley was kind of left to finish and add in her own anecdotes and memories to kind of flesh out the book, basically, just to finish the book. And I think if you're going to read this, and if you have the choice, definitely listen to the audiobook. The book is kind of structured in a way that it's Lisa Marie's autobiography, so it's a lot of her writing, and then there is different inserts from Riley's perspective of seeing her mom go through these moments that her mom's talking about, or having memories to kind of add to the different anecdotes. And the audiobook has Lisa Marie's writings. It is narrated by Julia Roberts, and Riley's excerpts are narrated by Riley herself. And then they've included little clips of Lisa Marie's tapes that she recorded when she was writing this book. So it was really cool to have all of those elements in one. It was a great listening experience. It's not a long book at all. It's a pretty quick read or listen. So I highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it. It's really sad. It talks about how, addiction kind of runs through families, and how the rise to fame for Elvis really changed how he interacted with the world and how close him and Lisa Marie were. And then his sudden passing, how it really affected Lisa Marie the rest of her life and affected her children's life. And, she succumbed to her addiction in 2020. So there's a lot of really sad things that go on here, but it really gives you insight into such a crazy life. And I thought it was beautifully done, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. Okay. And then finally I got to Atonement this month. This has been on my TBR for a long time, my mental TBR. It has been one of those books that I've wanted to read ever since seeing the movie. And I think the movie came out in 2005 or something like that. So it's been on my radar for quite some time. I finally bought the book this year, and I was like, this is the year that I'm going to read it. So I really made a point to want to read this book and push myself to get to this one. I think I've kind of pushed it off just because, knowing how much I love the movie and how sad it is, I knew I kind of had to be in the right frame of mind for this, because I really wanted to soak it in and really enjoy it for what I thought it would be. Overall, I really enjoyed it. It's definitely a writing style that I had to kind of whip myself into shape to read. I was coming off of fantasy and thrillers, and then to read something where the writing style is much more flowery, it's much more kind of prosy and poetic. It kind of took me a little bit to adjust to, but then once I kind of adjusted to it, I was like, wow, super, super beautiful. There's so many really pretty passages in here and things that are described, or moments that I'm like, wow, that's the way to describe that. I never would know how to describe that, but he describes it perfectly. So if you haven't seen the movie or you haven't heard about this book, it's basically about a character who has this big misunderstanding and miscommunication about another character, and it affects all of their lives from that point on. And it's really a book that is about how all of these little tiny things that happen from all these different perspectives can really make this decision happen, and how it affects and follows these people for the rest of their lives. And it's a really sad, hard book to read. I really enjoyed it though. I am so glad that I finally got to it. I think this is one of those books that I could read again and pick up and notice things that maybe I didn't notice before. My camera cut off, so I was talking about this book. I think I was talking about how this book really aligns with the movie. If you've seen the movie and you read this book, all of these scenes play out in your mind as the movie, just because a lot of the same conversations and moments happen exactly like the book does in the movie. So if you like the movie, you will, I think, like this book, because it does follow each other pretty closely. I enjoyed that part of it because I could literally watch the movie in my head as I was reading this book. So I ended up giving this 5 stars. I think there was moments where it was hard for me to kind of get through some of the writing style, but overall, especially the ending in the second half, it really got me. And I was like, this is such a unique, beautiful story, and such an interesting topic of how somebody's misunderstanding could change multiple people's lives. It was just, yeah, I really liked it. And then to kind of finish off the rest of this month, I was looking kind of for a shorter book so that I could kind of wrap up the month neatly. And I picked up and finished Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. This has been on my TBR just recently. I've seen a lot of people talking about James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, and it's really attracted me to those authors and made me want to pick up more of their writing. And James Baldwin, I think this is probably his most popular, if not one of his most popular books. And so I picked this one up. It's a really short read, but I really enjoyed it. Thankfully, I think because I came off Atonement in a certain type of like flowery writing, and going into this one kind of helped me, because this one also kind of followed suit. Obviously, Baldwin and Mick Ewan, the writer of Atonement, have different writing styles, but also they write in a way where they can describe a moment or a feeling in such a unique way that you totally understand that moment or feeling. And I enjoyed this one. The only thing that I didn't love about this one was I felt like some of the decisions that the characters were making, I just couldn't get with. I couldn't understand. And maybe just because this is of a different time. This takes place in the 50s. There's a different mindset, and also just the way that the characters acted very dramatically. I felt like it was a little over the top. I don't know, but I think that was also kind of the point, you know? So overall, I really liked this book. I think the only thing that kind of hung me up a little bit was the emotional intensity in the drama, but I think that was kind of the point. I didn't understand some of the characters' motives or why they reacted certain ways, but like I said, I think that was kind of the point, to really hit home the theme of this book of looking at your life, and do you follow the path that your heart wants, or do you follow the easier path in life that is expected of you, and grappling with who you are becoming and what decisions you're going to make that are going to kind of lead you down a different road depending on what you decide. So overall, I enjoyed it. I liked the writing style. I definitely will be picking up more Baldwin in the future, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Those were my books that I read this month. I had a great reading month. I have a goal of reading 100 books this year, and I am at 85. So I've been kind of averaging 8 books a month, maybe a little more than 8 books. So I definitely think I will hit my goal as long as nothing unexpected comes up. And that's super exciting for me because I've never read 100 books in a year. I have a little stack of books that I'm really trying to finish that I don't want to talk about reading anymore. I just want to read them and get them off my TBR, because I keep putting them on TBRs and keep saying I'm going to read them, but I really want to finish them and read them and leave them in 2024. So we will see how that goes. But thank you so much for watching my video, and if you can, please like the video or subscribe, and I so appreciate you joining me here in my little book corner of the internet, and I will see you in my next video.